Your insiders are Pierre, LeBrun, and Darren Drager. And boys, it's been a while since we've seen a scene on the opening face-off like that one between the Rangers and the Devils last night. Line brawl, 8 players ejected. They settled things, but is that the end of it, or will the NHL have something to say when it comes to terms of supplementary discipline, Drags?
No, because it was so well handled by the on-ice officials, there's no reason for the National Hockey League to follow up with additional discipline. Now, you mentioned that 8 players were ejected. I mean, this happened right off the face-off, right? You got to go back a long time, back to 2014, to recognize when the last time 8 players were ejected for this type of activity. Now, they called fighting majors, of course, but they ejected the players. If they had left it at fighting majors, and perhaps the nastiness that we saw from the opening face-off on Wednesday night turns into something far more ugly later in the game. But again, go back to 2014. That was the Vancouver Canucks and the Calgary Flames. And that turned downright nasty and spilled over into the hallway when John Tortorella, the head coach of the Vancouver Canucks, was desperately trying to get into the Calgary Flames dressing room. I mean, he took a couple of swipes at Bob Hartley, then the head coach of the Flames, according to eyewitnesses then, before the cameras arrived and ultimately Flames enforcer Brian McGrath. And so a couple of things proved here. The NHL doesn't need to follow up on what happened Wednesday night, and John Tortorella is feisty as he's ever been.
Yes. Tuesday on Insider Trading, we reported more than 20 NHL teams interested in NCAA free agent star Collin Graf. So, Pierre, with all that interest, why did he end up choosing the San Jose Sharks?
Well, I can tell you it was a difficult decision for him and his family. I mean, they really deliberated over the last few days. They thought this decision might be taken earlier. And in fact, it was 26 teams, James, that have shown interest over the last year in trying to sign him because he did talk to some teams last spring, but he decided to go back and play another year of school. It came down to 6 teams, the Wild, the Penguins, and the Avalanche among those 6 teams. And obviously in San Jose, ample opportunity, a team that's gutted its roster and trust in where that rebuild is going. And agent Jerry Buckley and the player doing Zoom calls with all 6 teams 2 weeks ago before finally deciding now. And whenever a top free agent like this signs, the question is, why wasn't he drafted to begin with? And part of the answer is this. 4.5 years ago, he was 5'8" and 140 pounds. Today, he's 6'1" and 195 pounds. That's Mike Johnson-esque as a late bloomer, and San Jose's happy to have him.
Absolutely. Guys, we've gone without best-on-best hockey for a while, and now we're going to get a ton of it with the 4 Nations next year, followed by the Olympics the year after. So with those 2 events fairly close together, how will Canada handle head coaching duties for that, Pierre?
Well, there was an interesting moment this week in Toronto, James. I happened to be at the morning skates, and John Cooper, head coach of the Lightning, was asked in that media scrum, would you like to coach Canada for these best-on-best events? And he kind of hesitated in the sense that, of course, he wants to coach Canada, but he has not spoken to Hockey Canada about the process for this. And I'm not sure, like a lot of people, that he knows this, which is that Team Canada plans on making this 2 separate coaching gigs, 2 separate announcements. So once the 4 Nations team has a GM, and we expect that GM to be named before the Stanley Cup playoffs here, that GM will be in charge of hiring a coaching staff for 4 Nations. But then Doug Armstrong, the Olympic GM, is then in charge of hiring or of naming a coaching staff for the Olympics in Italy. Now, it could be the same head coach. There's no rule against that, but it is 2 separate announcements, 2 separate processes for that head coach. And of course, Sean Cooper's not the only great candidate out there. Paul Maurice and Peter the Boer, Bruce Cassidy just won a Stanley Cup, Jared Bednar, and so Rod Brindamore. There's lots of good candidates, and that's why perhaps it won't be the same person for both gigs.
Yeah, and a reminder here, guys, as Team Canada continues to piece together its roster for the upcoming Men's World Championship roster, the ongoing process of appeal continues for Hockey Canada as it relates to the World Junior 2018 version of Team Canada. What that means is all the players on that 2018 roster, so players that might be of interest to Team Canada at the Men's Worlds, like Jordan Kyrou, Robbie Thomas, Drake Batherson from the Ottawa Senators, remain under suspension. The entire roster of players from 2018 will be suspended until the conclusion of the appeal process. It does not relate, though, to the 4 Nations Cup because the NHL covers the sanctions there.
You would think that the appeals, and once all those investigations are done, any of the players who would not be involved would be cleared by that time, that will all be taken care of. But we will see here on Insider Trading.